In 1971, Sergio Martino directed giallo film The Case of the Scorpion's Tail. As giallo as an early 70s giallo can be, it contains whimsical music, unnecessarily sexual scenes, and a plot that is somewhere between nonsensical and genius. I'm the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. So this is a very exciting day, as far as I'm concerned, because I believe I'm, out of either this podcast, Italian Horror Guy podcast, or the Horror Film Science podcast, I don't believe I have watched a film for the first time for the purposes of a podcast. So this is really, really cool. I think I was quite deliberate in choosing not necessarily his most Sergio Martino's most famous giallo film. For this one, there was probably a few between the late 60s and Torso that I could have chosen, and I wanted to build into that. So I even considered making it a giallo special of these 3 weeks and doing all three ones where I find another one as well as Torso, but I've decided to settle and still do the Mountain of the Cannibal God. I think that's what it's called anyway, because I like the range of that. Got sort of very quintessential giallo film, then very famous giallo film, but a rural giallo film, which there aren't many of those, and then something that isn't a giallo at all, because I do like the way that these directors were very versatile, very good at exploiting trends and whatnot. And there's certainly no doubt that this is what this film did. I don't think it was massively well known or massively popular, but like all giallo films, you see familiar actors and familiar plots. And honestly, what I felt straight off the bat in this film, and I'm sure you've noticed me do this before talking about these types of films, and just to be clear, this isn't me actually saying this is a bad film, because I don't even know necessarily what I think of it, but putting these films on can just put you in a happy place, or maybe happy place isn't the best way of putting it, but that detached, like, musical style that they have, and the way giallo films build tension through atmosphere, and the way they shift tension through atmosphere. I mean, so build tension through music and shift tension through music is really like nothing else, honestly. And I think I like this film, but it certainly isn't one of the stronger giallo films around. But it's just like, that doesn't matter, because they always have this atmosphere that is so appealing. So yeah, straight off we just have this amazing sounding giallo music, and I actually think I must say straight off the bat here, I can't quite remember exactly what is different about The Mountain of the Cannibal God to other cannibal movies, so I don't know if this will feed into that, but I think a lot of how this film unfolds has a very Sergio Martino feel to it, at least as I conceptualize him through the film Torso, which I'll be talking about next week. Now, this isn't to say this is unique to Martino, but certainly the extent of it in Torso, but he has an amazing ability to make men seem threatening, right? And it can be all of them. And it's interesting, right? Because obviously one of the insinuations, or not even insinuations, of giallo films is this tension of between men and women, this tension towards sexuality and stuff, and this sort of mixture of control that women and men, or that women can have with men. And look, I would say more often than not, killers turn out to be men, but generally speaking, I think when women show a degree of sexual control in these films, I it's not in a way that they're necessarily going to get punished for. Like I'm thinking even the punishment for that lady in The Cat o' Nine Tails is just that James Franciscus is a bit of a jerk to her, right? Whereas in this one, I must say, and I as I was watching it, I sort of went on different tangents, well, not necessarily tangents, different thoughts about, okay, so what's the conclusion here? And I had a few. First was that we didn't, the husband doesn't die. It was probably worth mentioning that the plane crash is pretty comical, but anyway. And also the way they sort of cut it between this sexual encounter between the original Fairbairn in this film and whoever she's sleeping with. And like it's sort of like a climax and the phallic plane explodes, but there's probably enough analysis of that. But having watched Torso a couple of times and having a real sort of understanding of the way Sergio Martino's films can be, I must say, when Anita Strindberg appeared the way that she did, with this sort of control, almost, well, like photographer and reporter, a bit like in Deep Red. See, in Deep Red, that the whole point of it is to undermine David Hemmings' masculinity. In this one, though, I didn't trust it, right? That, to be honest, is when she showed up that I actually started suspecting George Hilton a little bit. I did take a note at one point that said George Hilton is the killer and has an accomplice. So I ended up nailing it, which I was quite happy with. But the reason I thought that there's a chance that the husband is alive is because that picture we see of him, like he's in other giallo films, right? Like he wasn't just some guy. I can't remember if we actually see him in the first scene, but we certainly don't see much of him. So it really felt like, well, he's gonna appear at some point, and it was sort of surprising to me, that ending. That I guess it's just a bit odd. Maybe they wanted us to keep that open, that possibility open. So, great scenes, right? Straight off. It's so voyeuristic. There's nothing more voyeuristic, actually, I think, than the giallo film. It's well, again, to compare this opening scene. So there's the woman, I think it's Ida Gali. She's walking through, Ida Gali, walking through I think, look, is this film, does it start in London and then move to Athens? Is that what happens? Because it looks awfully London and Thames-like at the start. They just don't make it particularly clear. Well, maybe they do and I just wasn't following. But anyway, she's walking through London, I'll say, amongst a lot of people. And there's just that brilliant thing that happens in the giallo. As I said, it reminds me a lot of Argento, reminds me a lot of The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, where you know someone's watching. You don't know which of the camera angles that we're seeing they're watching from, though. And it's just tension, right? It's this woman is under some kind of threat. And it's so bloody giallo and it's so tense, and it's just great cinema as far as I'm concerned. And part of the effectiveness, I think, of these films so often is the way they get under your skin emotionally right from the start. And this is like, there's no build up to it. It's just straight away something's off, right? Straight away we have to have this sense that the women in this film are in trouble, and indeed at some stages the men as well. So I can't, like the shots through windows, the shots between trees, it's just really, really great cinematography. And you know, they weave this in. I think she calls someone on a payphone and says something about plane. And look, I'll get to it, but I think the reason why it's like quite obviously, the reason that it stays with this theme of like women under threat all the time is because Ida Gali is the main character for 25 minutes and she gets murdered, but she's completely the main character. Like, I honestly think that's such a clever thing. It's very like Psycho, right? It keeps you on edge, but B, it confuses you, I think, because you don't know what to follow after that. Like, I looked it up, and I know Anita Strindberg from a couple of films, but definitely from Lizard and Woman's Skin. So I see her on the cast, and I think, well, she's going to be quite significant. She literally replaces a main character in this film. Like, we don't see her at all. When we see her, it's to photograph the previous main character as as a role as a journalist or whatever she is. So it's like we just don't know what's going to happen. But we know there's tension. And also, just as I think I've made this point before, but giallo films had a tendency to get some of the most beautiful women that have ever existed. I feel like they all just sort of ended up in giallo films. Just give me a sec. Yeah, I'm just going to adjust myself. Well, you don't have to give me a sec. I'll keep rambling while I do so. Give the noise. So, that's better. That's way better. So indeed. Nothing like, a bit of cheating in the giallo film. I think it's extremely common. And see, there are so many things you can do with that as a theme in a film. And I think really all that we do here is show a bit of sex right from the start of the film, or near the start of the film, but B, the film doesn't want us to trust her. It doesn't want us to trust women. It doesn't want us to trust anyone. And the fact that we know there's the possibility they're going to pull a stupid move like, oh, he had an accomplice. Do we even meet, again, it's in his explanation at the end, and it's a classic lengthy explanation. It's probably not done in the absolute most effective way of all time, but it's all right. At least he does explain to us what's going on for any of us who couldn't work it out. I like the idea that, like, pretty early, everything's very like, every character seems to be accusing every other character of wanting the insurance money. This is also like a sort of nice little callback to like Hitchcock films as well, which is cool. It's actually very Lizard and Woman's Skin now that I think about it as well, which was also 1971. But it's like the nefarious motivations of the characters within the giallo. Like, I think this is something that, like, I really, really appreciate the more and more I really get into this genre, and I'm well into it, is that I don't think any of the characters are just good, right? Like, I think of like Mark Daly from Deep Red, for example, and he's one of the very, very few characters that is good in a way that doesn't actually have bad intentions, and yet, the whole film is largely about his personality flaws. Now, I wouldn't call him bad, but I wouldn't call him completely good, but in terms of, he's probably the most got the best heart out of any characters I can think of straight off the top of my head in giallo films. Part of the, I think, strategy, you might say, of these films is always to keep you on edge about, like, do I like this character? Can I trust this character? And I think well, I suspect this is the case, that often we might like some of the women in these films, but we know full well that there's a very good chance that they're not trustworthy. It's got they always have sort of very film noir. I think they're really inspired by film noir giallo films in general, and it's just damn cool, right? I don't know. I just think from a structural perspective, and like we're all attracted to horror films from the way that it can explore the follies of the human soul and all that kind of crap. The giallo films, to me, as a general rule, have probably, I don't know, maybe the most effective way of like really delving into the depths of the negative sides of the human condition, because they also tend to be fairly nuanced in their motivations. And the thing is, this is my experience anyway, when you finish watching a giallo film and you get the answer right, you've been given so many different possibilities about who it is, or who's been a victim, or who's victimized that person, because often like there are victims that aren't as a result directly of the actual killer, that they're often not exactly like other murder mysteries where you're like, it could be that guy, it could be that guy, but the second it's not that guy, they just reset to being good. I don't think you get that experience with giallo films in general. It's often a lot more like, well, I've spent a lot of this film thinking it might be you, but I've more spent this film thinking it's you because you're not a very good person. So it's like they still have their flaws. So I think everything's very fundamentally like, you're not meant to go home thinking, well, that was just a bunch of good people getting victimized by some psycho. Like, I don't think that's how the giallo should be conceptualized. Yeah, so a lawyer tells Gully that she's getting $1 million, and I'm just using the actors' names because they all the actors' names are like, I recognise most of them, and I can't be bothered saying boring character names because they're all so interchangeable, I think. Yeah, so that's right. When she goes into the lawyer's office, we see some guy watching her, and then when she comes out, we see him watching her again. Very Sergio Martino, very giallo. She eventually seems to be wandering next to the Thames, and that's that classic sense of like impending doom and being stalked, and there being that figure behind you, right? You take out all other sounds, no music, and you also get like maybe the chirping of birds, very maybe Four Flies on Grey Velvet, when that mother lady is stuck in that park. Like it's like the air's been sucked out of the place. And we do get some kind of reward for this sort of straight away, because the guy follows her in there and catches her and stuff, but we don't know what the situation is, and it's just he's a sort of junkie type trying to bribe her, and he knows her, but he's trying not to ruin her, or sorry, he's threatening to ruin her because she had motivation to get that money. It's all very, very vague, but it's sort of funny, right? That's sort of how the first half an hour of this film functions. Like, this guy is going to ruin her, or so he thinks, by exposing the fact that she knew she was going to get this money if he died. But so I'm just trying to think, it doesn't really make sense. Like, is the supposed accusation that she organised the plane exploding in order to get, I don't know, but it's like, I'm going to accuse you wanted him dead so you could get his money, and I'm going to threaten to kill you. I don't remember if this guy threatens to kill her, but the other girl later does. I'm going to accuse you of doing this purely because you could have possibly been motivated to do it, and if you don't give me money, I'm going to kill you. It's like, well, it sounds like you might have been the one that did it. But that's the thing, right? It's like everyone accusing each other of things quite aggressively without evidence, but always with the motivation, right? That's the thing. The characters generally in this film, and a lot of giallo films, their motivations often aren't just to find out. As in, you'll often get that one character, right? Right at the forefront, but then everyone else around. But in this one, it sort of feels like you don't even have that character exactly. It briefly becomes George Hilton at a point, but obviously, as we'll discuss, that it's a bit of a false dawn. Yeah, and while it keeps escalating, right? There's tension everywhere, but also there's like a growing sense of the stakes. So, she is getting accused by this guy who's been following her, but it's like initially when this scene's going on, like, we don't know if this guy's going to be a long-term character in the film. Once the chase scene starts, we know, because you can tell he's going to catch her. You're like, well, this is right at the start of the film. So he's more, not exactly a diversion, but like he's there in order to, at least focus something on him first. And we really focus on him because he's a threat. So then he gives us information about the insurance, but more gives us the information in terms of this is how this film functions. It's people threatening each other for their own benefits, right? Everyone trying to benefit, financially from each other, and I guess if there is a sort of clue for how it ends, I guess that sort of makes sense. But while this is happening, we see it sort of escalates, right? Because we can see another voyeur watching this conversation, and this one has the black gloves on, so this is much more terrifying. So everything is always voyeuristic and stalkery, threatening. And then he's dead pretty soon. Is the bribe man. So that's really sad for him. Soon she's at dinner with, I think, George Hilton. I'm just trying to understand my notes here. I think so. Yeah. And he accuses her. And then Alberto de Mendoza shows up. Also, again, from Lizard in a Woman's Skin. And also, what's the other one that he's in? I was actually thinking from Perversion Story, where he plays a big role, but he plays a basically identical role to this in A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, where he's just sort of a sort of clever investigator. He's got a good presence. I think he was a really cool actor. I really like him. Sorry about any noise in the background. Maybe the walls aren't as thick here as I thought they were in my apartment complex, if you could call it that. While George Hilton is having dinner with Ida Gali, De Mendoza's watching from a few tables away. So now he feels like a stalker. He feels like a bit of a threat. We've also seen Perversion Story, so we feel like he can be a bit of a threat. And, then we get some classic giallo stuff. Look, again, I'm never certain if it's me just not following plots properly, or like they just sort of put you in places and expect you to work it out. So she goes to see the arty people, and this is something I fucking love so much about giallo films. Now, I'm not saying that films of the era didn't do other stuff. Didn't do stuff like this. I know that they would engage with the arts and stuff, but sometimes it's like there's just artsy-fartsy stuff just for the sake of it. Like, she goes and sees that not couple, there's that woman with very striking features, right, the pianist, and she has that bodyguard sort of guy who seems to be the same one as Four Flies on Grey Velvet, like maybe even the same actor. I don't know, I didn't look that up. I don't know if it would be readily available anyway. But in order to get there, it's like upstairs, and downstairs there's all these dummies, and it feels like they're jumping out at her. It's like, this is just fucking giallo as fuck right now, you know? And it's just great. Just all this tension just for her to get upstairs to this woman with a piano, right, in this really cool theatre. That was the other thing that reminded me of Four Flies on Grey Velvet. This guy emerging, it's like this is his role. You wear sunglasses, you're an investigator, and you walk around in theatres. It's pretty cool. So, that's right. There's that chase scene that's really like back down these winding stairs, and that's right between. I always feel like winding stairs in giallo films, they're almost like a portal, right? Like in how you'd get in a fantasy film, like we're going somewhere else, we're going into a different world, and so they sort of threaten to kill her, and then they very much don't catch her. But they should, because, you know, the guy's right near her. She gets away when... Actually, I must say this scene's sort of confusing, because George Hilton shows up and they seem to... They seem to be right where she is, and then they just get in a car as if... I don't know if they locked them in somewhere, I don't know. It's just... It's not particularly well explained. And then Ida Gully, who's been our main character, who we've grown to care about a little bit, I think, gets murdered. And it's such good writing, I reckon. Because it's not exactly shocking. There's a vibe to what's going on that makes you feel like she has a shelf life, this woman. Because the film is so aggressively setting this up, like the amount of events and the extent of those events that they fit into this opening 25 to 30 minutes of the film makes you feel like she's going to run her course, right? But at the same time, everything the film's doing is suggesting that this is the main character. She might die, maybe, but not right near the start of the film. And I reckon some of the kills in this movie are really, really cool, by the way. So she gets stabbed. And then it's so interesting. Like, it's such a fascinating and, like, risky but forward way of writing. So by the end of the film, we really understand this film through the lens of George Hilton and Anita Strindberg's characters. And through the lenses, because she's a photographer, of course. And we've seen a little bit of George Hilton up to this point. But, like, we don't realise the film's about those two. And Anita Strindberg hadn't even been in it yet. So it's like all of this stuff is just a means by which to introduce her. And the way, you know, George Hilton gets... I might just call him Hilton and Strindberg, I don't know. That everything that's going on is a means to a totally different end to what we think it is. And that's so damn cool, I reckon. I just have so much respect for it. I was sad when she died, though, but I was, it was very interesting. yeah, so typical how, a love story emerges from this situation, right? Typical giallo stuff, I mean. These two people meet at a murder scene and, yeah. I wrote here that I suspect her. Very disappointed in myself. I say, when Hilton talks to Cop tries to put puzzle piece in puzzle. Doesn't go in. He isn't going to solve this, yeah. Good notes there from me. Yeah. Look, I was actually mildly annoyed as this film went on with the puzzle thing because at first when I saw that, I thought that was all we were going to get from that puzzle. But the problem is puzzles are such an obvious symbol, right? Yeah, especially in a murder mystery, that they kept sort of returning to it, and that actually annoyed me a little bit, but the initial shot was cool. And I think this is said about, what's his name? George Hilton, by Anita Strindberg. For a murderer, he certainly has a great face. In fact, that might actually be included in the title of this episode. I didn't necessarily write down a hell of a lot of great quotes, but I reckon that was really damn cool. And also very much a precursor to the fact that they're clearly going to hook up. Yeah, at some point in here we switch to Athens. I don't know if this is the actual moment. Maybe it is. So Hilton and Strindberg are having dinner in Athens, and like whenever there's a male and a female in the giallo film, and the scene isn't just about the two of them. There is sexual tension. The fact that both of these two people are extremely good looking seems to add to that tension somehow. There's that. There's giallo music in the background, and you know what I mean by giallo music, right? It doesn't have a universal sound, but you know it when you hear it. She has a sense of control over him, and see, again, this fed to my suspicions of him as the film went on, because I thought, no, there are plenty of giallo films where the women have control. I just don't know if I trust Sergio Martino, right? And look, I know I do this a little bit too much when it comes to directors and being linked to the story and stuff, but just allow me to. It's more fun this way. But either way, I didn't trust it. Yeah, and she speculates that the husband mightn't be dead, and see, that sort of made me think, well, that felt like I took it off the table, right? Because if they're just going to do that, it's not going to feel as clever down the track if that does happen to be the end. So I was actually a bit annoyed when that happened. I thought, no, I wanted to come up with that. But it's also the film almost nodding at us saying, hey, we know all the shit that you're thinking. We know you're trying to work this out. So that's pretty cool. The piano lady, as I call her, with the extreme features, great scene when she dies. She's dropped off by the bodyguard guy, and there's just something about that architecture with those gates. She goes inside, and I like that she can hear what's going on. Like, she seems very aware, but, well, I was going to say but not certain, but to be honest, it doesn't exactly seem like one of those situations where someone thinks they've heard something in one of these films and, oh, no, it's fine, and then they get murdered. Like, she seemed pretty aware of it the whole time. When he's breaking in this dude, we see a shot of his face, and see, I don't know if this is brilliant or just like a tactic. It's definitely a tactic, but I don't know if it's a brilliant tactic. Again, I do apologise if I missed something, but I feel like part of Hilton's explanation at the end isn't... I don't think they give any particular link to who this guy is, to who his supposed partner is. So by showing his face, look, it's probably clever because they show his face and there's nothing you can do except think, okay, who's that guy? And why are we seeing his face? Because we think he's the killer. And they just sort of show it willy-nilly, right? And it's strange, right? Like it's very odd, but I guess the only disappointment is probably that it can only be a sort of shitty explanation, right? Like we're, I guess, wanting to think it's really cool that we see this guy's face, but the fact that we see it means he's sort of a nobody. And you can't get much more of a nobody than a sort of unexplained sidekick to the actual killer. But nonetheless, really cool scene. I also... So the bodyguard comes back. How does the woman get... How does she die? Oh. Wait. No, I've confused. I assume she gets stabbed. The bodyguard comes back and he chases the guy around. He ends up, hanging from a rooftop, which happens a very statistically improbable number of times in films. And he's hanging there, hanging on, and his hands are exposed. I love the way this scene unfolds because it's like, if this ever happened in real life, this is how it would happen. Now, in movies, that guy doesn't usually survive, but he survives in a slightly different way. Like he fights or there's some kind of confusion, but he just hangs there. He clearly doesn't have the strength or the ability to pull himself back up. And he doesn't sort of fight when the killer dude comes in. He just comes and slashes the top of his hands and he falls off and dies. But they add a bit of length to it just to have some tension, I suppose. But I just find that really cool. Like, just in the middle of all this nonsense that's going on, we get this scene unfold in a way that, I'll put it this way, you're not expecting it to unfold like that in a film. But I guess, the off chance that this would ever happen in real life, it's how it would happen in real life. So, as I say, I have a lot of respect for that. Okay. Oh yes, and I should have mentioned there's that really cool shot of the piano lady through the keyhole. That is very, very reminiscent of Marion Crane in Psycho, but we don't see any clothes actually being taken off. But even the way that she's standing is very, very similar. I think the giallo film does have a little bit to Psycho, which is cool. Yep, Strindberg gets a call about it. And then we get to that point where sort of somewhere between like halfway to 3/4 of the way through the giallo films, we start getting these scenes that are like, our expert gets called in and they start explaining things to us. And on this occasion we get, it might be, they're talking about, incisions and shots of, and we're seeing different shots of the bodies, and how they talk about the expert precision of the murderer, and then De Mendoza says he might be a sex maniac. Now, this is actually quite an interesting, if not just maybe slightly lazy piece of writing. These scenes in giallo films are always well connected to the result of what we end up getting. But like, I suppose George Hilton might be a sex maniac in this film. We see him in a few different sex scenes. And I suppose there might be precision in the stuff that he does. Or is it just that his sidekick had a lot of precision? I don't know. But it's like, isn't he like an insurance person? Like, why would he Why would he be like an expert user of scalpels in human skin? I don't know. It's just anyway. Then we see another sex scene with, you know, Anita, as I've labelled her here, looking absolutely exquisite. You know, nothing more probably needs to be said about that. And I must say, at this point of the film, I remember thinking to myself, when did the film earn the right for these two to be in this really, really loving relationship? Now, we've all had experiences watching giallo films where you know obviously what's about to happen with these two characters that come across each other, male and female, of course, and you think, well, there's a pretty obvious result here. I remember watching earlier today and thinking, well, now yesterday, it's just ticked over midnight, and thinking, like, this is, even for a giallo film, it almost felt like the film had forgotten about the fact that they just sort of met not that long ago. But thinking about it now, I think it's more, I think as much as anything, like, don't get me wrong, it was obviously, like, porn wasn't really a thing at the time, and it's quite beneficial to promise sex and see nudity and all that kind of stuff, right? So I get that. You want that in the film, as the director, as the producer, and as the audience. So that's fine. But there's something excessive about their relationship. And it's you know, the dinners and lunches they have with the unbelievable scenery and that sort of detached, whimsical giallo music that, you know, tells us that there's something lovey going on, there's something higher going on here. And there's a couple of sort of sex and sexy scenes, and some of them go on for a while, and it's like there's something instinctively within that they're sort of making me go, well, actually, this is because I think this is actually meant to be feeding into the excesses of George Hilton's character, I think is my point. So it's not necessarily that it's written in an over-the-top way. It's that it's well written that he's over the top is probably the best way to put it. So I hope I explained that well. I think I did. I'm happy with it anyway. That's right. There's that scene where there's that dorky guy looking in the window while they're sort of having sex. Again, it's like voyeurism for no reason, but it keeps us on edge. I even had this ridiculous thought that, oh, maybe that guy's the killer. Now, I haven't seen every giallo film, and so I'm not going to speak for all of them, but in general, I don't get this sense that, like, I don't know, I fucking hate that show, Supernatural, but didn't they sort of pull a fast one that was some random dude from an episode in season 2 that was doing it the whole time or something? That, like, as much as giallo films want to shock you with the endings, it can only ever be, like, about one of 4 people at most, right? So they're not going to do that, right? This guy, but just that constant sense of voyeurism and, you know, constant sense of things being awry, or at least not right, is very, very important, I think. And they do it really well, obviously. So, oh, that's right, yeah. The guy from The Affair at the start, the scene where he dies is fucking sensational, I reckon. Sitting there nervously watching the news, and there's some kind of, and then after that there's some kind of like a coverage of some kind of event, sports event going on, and that seems to be louder than it should be, right, as he's getting attacked. But look, maybe it's a Sergio Martino thing, I don't know, because it's similar with Torso. The way the deaths are shot in this film are really, on a number of occasions, are fucking fantastic. So he gets. I'm trying to think who gets stabbed in the eye. Is he the one that gets stabbed in the eye? It's either him or that piano lady woman, but anyway, the part of it that's cool is that shot where he falls back onto the bed. He's sitting on the floor, but he's back on the bed, and then you get the stab in the sort of heart. Now, at first, I thought it didn't look good because it's just one of those really efficient stabs and then pull away and that's over. And it looks very much, just generic giallo effect. But then the way the blood seeps into his shirt, it's very reminiscent of that scene from that movie. Can't think what it's called, but it's a 60s sort of western, I think, and Tarantino stole the idea. He gets shot in the posy on his shirt and the blood seeps. It was like that. That's just great cinema, right? And it reminded me of that. Okay, it is him. Yeah, sorry, I've seen my notes. It was that dude that got stabbed in the eye. So he gets very dead. And it's funny actually because there's that idea of men do die in giallo films as well, but they don't die with the same level of punishment. This guy did. No doubt at all. Usually those types of murders are reserved for women in these films. Then we get the Argento sort, and I apologise for bringing up Argento so much, as every early 70s giallo just has so many Argento things or things that remind me of him. But right now he starts going, I just can't quite put my finger on something. And that's what always happens in the Argento films anyway. And I didn't trust it so much because it's odd that you're doing that now, Mr. Hilton. I will say I love the cufflink element because those cufflinks are so cool. I reckon they just look really cool. As is probably the case with this film. And again, as I said, I don't think it's amazing, but I did enjoy it as a giallo. I enjoyed it because I enjoy giallo films. It's very solid in every way, but I think with some of the stuff, it's just not quite tightly written, right? So you get that aspect of, you'll get the ridiculous titles of animal-based titles in giallo films, and it's then you watch the film and it's but it's not really a big deal. The actual where the title came from. However, it'll often be the thing that relates directly to the death, right? Like the bird with the crystal plumage. Without that, you wouldn't have found it. Or the four flies on grey velvet, or the scorpion's tail, right? It's cool, and they just look really cool. But I mean, just in terms of how I think he gets done in, is just well, there's not even how he gets done in. It's just someone else came in with similarly designed, not a cufflink, but something on her shirt. I don't know. It's just a bit like that aspect of it is not written with any sort of, excessive rigor or anything. It's just not amazing, but it's fine. The ending sequence, and I suspect I'll be going on a lot about Torso's ending sequence next week. The ending sequence here actually reminded me of Torso. Because as I tend to do, I sort of keep an eye on how far into films that I am. And I noticed this 95-minute film, and I'm past the 80-minute mark, and they're on this boat. And it's we're now at the point where it really has to be one of the two of them that are the killer. And in a funny way, this film doesn't I don't think this film really attempts to hide much from you. So George Hilton goes diving at one point with his bag or something, and like Anita Strindberg knows that there's something up, and that's sort of I guess it's just that this little look. I think the disappointment with this film and why it's not as good as like the best gialli is that it doesn't. The actual explanations aren't particularly exciting. Like, okay, so it's about money and stuff, and you can get that. But like, if you think about Psycho, it's like it's based around money, but ultimately has nothing to do with it. But here it's like, okay, so he dives under the water, and then he comes back up, and suddenly she's there. So, oh, did you catch that whale? And that's actually a really cool shot. And she's like, actually, I think I might have written down that quote. Well, darling, did you catch your whale? Actually, that I might put that in the title instead, because it rhymes with tail as well. But anyway, it's just a bit like there's nothing excessively complicated or that cool about it, I think. So then she dives in later and sees that the bag was full of money. Okay. It's just a bit disappointing, I guess. Like, it's not a massive criticism. It's just that being really cool and being really, really well written is the difference between this being a decent giallo film that you enjoy because it's giallo, and it actually being a really good one. Just things aren't quite tight enough, and the ultimate motivations and whatnot aren't quite good enough to make you think that it's hideously great, but it is very entertaining. So was it the way it cuts into this moment, right? It's actually, the editing's quite weird. Like, he finds her, and then he's just immediately telling giving the explanation, and it's like it seems at first he's giving the explanation from the cave, and then it cuts to, what are they, back at the boat? And he's just being so thorough about it, but almost too thorough. Now, I get it. At the time, this is how explanations happened in these films, and that's all very well and good. The problem is, and this is actually, I think I went on about this a bit with the Lizard in the Woman's Skin episode with Alberto de Mendoza's character. I love the aspect of that where he's like giddy, he's like a child loving his brilliant plan that he's pulled off. And the film gets away with it because it sort of feels like the writers of the film are doing it as well. They're going, yeah, look at how fucking clever we are. Whereas this, it's just not that clever. And because like his main motivation is that he'd never made much money out of his job, and he saw an opportunity to make some money by doing this. It's like, yeah, okay. And that his other motivation is that he seems to love her, right? So that's good. When she harpoons him, that's cool. And, you know, there's that lengthy swimming session back to the shore. I think I must say, look, it probably isn't that complicated, but I actually think he acts this scene very well, like how he's swimming basically with one side of his body. I think that's really cool. It sort of emphasizes his power. I'm not sure, but he seemed like he was a pretty tall man. He seemed very physically imposing, and that's really, really important. So no complaints there. And yeah, I guess the thing is, like, giallo films are obviously very, very well known for their silly endings, or not silly endings, but sometimes silly endings, but always like attempting to be wow endings. And that's fine as far as I'm concerned. I'm all for that. I guess the problem is sometimes they're quite quick, and like we get the explanation, someone dies, and then it's over. And that's okay. And partly the reason it's okay is because it's so in line with the overall nature of these films. Like, they can be so ponderous. And because of the scenery, because of the characters, because of the music, you're happy for it to be ponderous, right? Well, I know I am anyway. Like, these films almost never drag for me. But sometimes you'll get an epic long explanation. And here we do get a fairly long explanation. But when you're taking the time to be like, yeah, we want to really emphasize this, it's probably because it's really good, right? Like it's the part of the script the writers were most proud of. And I just don't think that the motivations are good enough. I will say, I think, I'm not exactly certain straight off the top of my head, but just doing that, I think that how the film unfolds is very true to the explanation. I think one of the problems often with the convoluted nature of giallo films, and I think this is partly why they don't necessarily explain their endings too thoroughly, is that often there are things that happen in them that actually really don't make sense. So, or at least aren't particularly sensical. In this case, it's not a problem really at all, I don't think. Like, everything sort of checks out. Like, the logic and the order of events, like when stalking things were happening, when people were murdered as a result, like the junkie guy at the start and all that. Like, it all makes sense. But the problem is just sort of, mathematically putting your plot on screen effectively doesn't mean the plot itself is particularly good. So, I think there's a really, really cool shot where she is hiding behind that little bit of the cave, like the rocks there, and we can see her and we can see him, but she knows where he is, but he doesn't know where she is. It's really, really cool. But obviously, don't do those multiple shots of relief on her face where it's like, he's gonna get her, and he does. He ends up sort of bashing her head on the rocks, and I don't know. I think there was a part of me that thought she was actually going to die, but we should know better than that. As much as the giallo film can be mean-spirited, it doesn't usually kill its main character. Well, it might kill them after 25 minutes, but it doesn't usually kill the one that replaces her. And then he gets shot by the cops, and I think another thing as well, like, obviously I really like Alberto de Mendoza, but he's not the main cop. I think these films are made much, much better when the main cop is really likable. And the sort of not finishing the puzzle properly cop is not of much interest to me. And then we finish off, and there's a little explanation where they talk about how he planted the Scopion. And see, on the one hand, it's like, oh, cool, we've wrapped that up. But on the other hand, it's like, well, that's boring, right? Like part of the best thing about not just giallo films, but murder mysteries in general is like, oh, what's that little item doing there? If the explanation is, oh, well, he put it there deliberately, it's just a bit boring. Like, because it feels like it was left there accidentally. And that's when it's cool, because especially in giallo films where the killer's always so methodical, right? But it's like, no, him putting it there was actually him being methodical. That's a bit boring. And then Alberto de Mendoza just sleazes on her in the car at the end for some reason. And then we get this massive giallo music as the shot of the car is driving away, and we reflect on the film, and we're like, wasn't amazing, but it was a giallo, and there are worse ones out there, and even the bad ones are pretty good. So there you go. There's my impressions of a film. The first time I've watched a film that I had not watched before, purely for the purposes of one of these podcasts, or so I believe anyway. This is good. I like that it's a good precursor to Torso next week, which I really can't wait to talk about. I think Torso is a fucking incredible film. Some of the music in that film is unbelievable. The tension, the explanations, everything. And Susie Kendall's in it as well, which helps. So join me for that one. Thank you for joining me for this episode. It's been really fun. And yeah, I'm the Italian Horror Guy, so join me for my podcast in future. Thanks very much, guys.